And we are live. Okay, good evening, everybody. So what I want to do today is really go into the some halachas and some ideas around that very important time of the day, which is Seudah Shlishit. Just as a preface to it, I just want to look at a couple of things. Not really sure what to do with them, but as I was preparing, I just saw something that struck me that maybe we can do something with. Again, I'm not sure what to do with it, but I'm going to share my screen, and we can start having a look at this. Somewhat interesting, I think is probably the best word to use. Just observation that I think that I've made, and then anyone who'd like to maybe comment, I'd love to hear your feelings. So, if we look in the words of the things that we say when we start Shabbos, what we do is we say lechadodi likrat kala penei Shabbat nekabla. Lechadodi, let us go. Dodi likrat kala, which means to go and greet the kala. Penei Shabbat nekabla, let's go and receive it. And then we say boi, let her come in b'shalom. Boi kala, we invite her in. So it's clear. Firstly, that we're trying to do things together. Let's go together. Panei Shabbat nekabla. There's a certain level of community, of jointness in the engagement of the bringing in of Shabbos into our world. However, there's a fascinating thing that we as Ashkenazim have the minhag to sing Mizmor David at Seudah Shlishit as we saying goodbye to Shabbos. But as you go into it, you can see there's something interesting. If I will walk, you are with me. There's a lot of differences. There's not just me. There's not just us together. There's you and there's me. You are with me, but you're separate from me. In the other one, we are going out to go and to bring Shabbos. Here it says Tov v'Chesed. We are asking Tov and Chesed, goodness and Chesed. Yirdufuni to run after me. V'shavti b'veit Hashem l'orech yamim. I will dwell in the house of Hashem l'orech yamim. There's a lot of the singular rather than the collective. And it's something to think about is that as we go into Shabbos, we move out of our singularity, out of our way of doing things on our own, and we become part of this bigger community. And perhaps that's going to play a big role, and we'll see where it manifests itself in a few places, possibly. Perhaps that's part of what Shabbos is. But however, as we move out of Shabbos, we lose that communal space and try to engage perhaps on a much deeper space, individual space with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to enable us and to ensure that we take Shabbos with us as individuals into the week. It's not only about the bracha, and it's not only about the socializing, but there's something bigger in Shabbos as well that we have to think about, and that would seem to manifest itself in even in the songs that we sing. Okay, so we'll work on that a little bit more, but I just wanted to point that out. Now, let's go. Halacha. Starts the Rambam. The Rambam here, this is from the 30th chapter of the Halachas of Shabbos, and in the beginning of the chapter of the 30th chapter of Halachas of Shabbos, the Rambam speaks about the concept that there are four halachas. There's Shamor and Zachor, which are D'oraisa, which are from the Torah, and then there are two things called Oneg and Kavod. Kavod Shabbos, the honor that we give to Shabbos, and Oneg is the enjoyment of Shabbos. And comes along the Rambam and he says in Halacha Yud, Achilat basar u'shtiyat yain b'Shabbos oneg, that eating meat and drinking wine on Shabbos is oneg. It's part of the enjoyment space of Shabbos. Now, it's very interesting that he says that, because we're going to need to unpack it a little bit. But that only, when are you going to get the oneg of Shabbos if you're eating meat and drinking wine? That's if you can afford it. Yadom haseget. So if you are able to afford meat and wine, which are traditionally the more expensive, more exclusive, more fancy, call it foods, so then that's what you must do for Shabbos. Then he says, although it's part of Oneg Shabbos, even though it's part of Oneg Shabbos, you're not allowed asur to set a Seudah ala yain, meaning a proper Seudah with wine and everything else, on Shabbos and Yamim Tovim, b'shas Beis HaMidrash, the time when it's the learning time at the shul, the learning time at the Beis HaMidrash. And it's such an important idea, this idea of, I don't want to be too hectic, but the idea of saying that I can't stay for the shiur because I need to go for lunch, that is counter what Shabbos is about. Because Shabbos is not about simply the oneg of the butter and the yayin, but Shabbos is also about the oneg of the spiritual oneg, and the spiritual oneg I get is from the learning. And so therefore our Shabbos process, the way the Shulchan Aruch will present it in other places, is that our Shabbos process is we daven, we learn, then we go and eat. And that's why we've actually created that. We've called the davening, we have a little bracha, then we learn, and then after that is Shabbos lunch, and that's really how it should be, at least according to the way the Rambam presents. This is what the minhag of the great tzaddikim, the early tzaddikim was. Mispalel Adam b'Shabbos shachris, musaf, the base knesses. What they would do is they would daven shachris and musaf in the shul. And then he'd go home. And he'd eat his second meal. Remember, the first meal is Friday night. Go and learn. They'd sit and learn until mincha. Can you imagine how geschmack that must have been? After they would have their first meal, and remember, they would daven early. They would learn until mincha time. And according to them, and in this case, the Rambam, it would be probably be mincha gedola, which would be in the middle of the day. But he's palel mincha. And they would eat daven mincha. Listen to what he says. Then he would establish Seudah Shlishit, the third meal, al hayayin v'yochel v'yishtad motzei Shabbos. And then you would eat and you would drink until motzei Shabbos. So it's clear from the Rambam that the order of events is shachris musaf, then eating, then mincha, then after mincha is Seudah Shlishit, and Seudah Shlishit should have yayin. It seems to be from the Rambam that the chashivas, the importance of the meal, is established by the fact that you're going to have wine at the meal. So that's just something to bear in mind. Okay, so that's where the Rambam puts it. It gives the order, but it doesn't say anything much more to it. Comes along the Shulchan Aruch. And the Shulchan Aruch says, hold on a second. Now we have to understand also where the Shulchan Aruch is coming from. If you remember, the Shulchan Aruch, Rav Yosef Karo, wrote this book when he was in Tzfat. He's in Tzfat. Amongst the people in Tzfat are all the great Mekubalim, all the great Kabbalists. And so comes along Rav Yosef Karo. He writes this Sefer whilst he is in Tzfat, amongst the great Kabbalists, and therefore he has a deep understanding of perhaps a higher level of just having another meal. We know that we have to have a Seudah Shlishit because of the way the Torah presents that we have to have that. But let's look into the bit of a depth of it. So it says the Shulchan Aruch, Seudah Shlishit. Person should be very careful to fulfill the Seudah, the mitzvah of Seudah Shlishit. Why does the Shulchan Aruch have to say that? Because obviously that in the winter months when the days are short and you have a decent lunch, so who wants to eat Seudah Shlishit? He says, even if a person is totally satiated, you can fulfill Seudah Shlishit with the smallest amount of kabetza. It's nothing. It's like 100 grams, or it's nothing. But if a person cannot eat at all, you have no obligation to put yourself into pain of any or agony of any type of discomfort. And if you don't have to eat it, but then says the Shulchan Aruch, but the person needs to have eyes in his head. Shelo yimale bitno b'Seudah Haboker. You shouldn't fill yourself in your Seudah Haboker. Seudah Haboker means your morning meal. In this case, he's talking about what we would call lunch. In order that you would give space for Seudah Shlishit. Now, this concept, just keep this in mind, because it's going to come up a little bit later. This idea of keeping space for Seudah Shlishit. And there he says, the Ramah says, okay, what happens if you fell asleep Friday night, you didn't eat? And if you didn't eat Friday night, so then you got to space yourself a little bit more. You got to eat your three meals over the whole course of Shabbat. And now, obviously, that's clear that from the Ramah side, how important Seudah Shlishit is that you have to have three meals. You have to have these three specific meals in order to ensure that you fulfill the mitzvahs of Seudah Shlishit. Are there any questions up till this point? Okay, so I want to show you something, just an idea that comes from the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah is telling us that we have to eat these, quoting from the Gemara, that we've got to eat these three meals. But the Mishnah Berurah says the following, if you can see where the hand is. Even for an oni who goes from place to place, you can't just give him for 2 meals, you've got to give him enough for 3 meals on Shabbos. Right? It says, even if a person has to borrow money for Shabbos, you got to borrow for what? For all 3 meals. Okay, so we can see the chashivas of Seudah Shlishit. Comes along the Shulchan Aruch, and it continues and follows. Zmana, when is the time for Seudah Shlishit? So we learned already that the time for Seudah Shlishit, according to the Rambam, is after you've done mincha. So he says, "Mana mishiagia zmana mincha." The time for Seudah Shlishit, actually, the obligation begins from the time that mincha can be davened, which is sheish sha'ot mechza l'mayla, from 6.5 hours into the day. Im asa akoidim lechein. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, sorry about that. So it says that, so the Shulchan Aruch says, what happens if my computer died or something? Apologies. What happens if you do Seudah Shlishit before those 6.5 hours? So if you do Seudah Shlishit before those 6.5 hours, so then you haven't done anything. You have not completed the mitzvah of Seudah Shlishit, and that's so we can see that they really Chazal really are concerned about this concept of this mitzvah of Seudah Shlishit, to the extent that they're really given that very, very definitive rules around it. But now we're going to go now into something which is quite kind of esoteric, and we're going to allow ourselves to wander into a world that very few of us really understand, and that is the world of neshamas, really, because what we're going to see here is that the Shulchan Aruch says that the time of Seudah Shlishit is not just an ordinary time. It's a very special time. It's a very difficult time. And we're going to try and understand that, because if we can understand that, then we will see the being in the Seudah Okay, so says the, can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure you just put a thumbs up or say yes. I would appreciate that. Great, thank you, Laura. Okay, so let's go back to the sharing screen. So now we see, says the Mishnah Berurah, says the Shulchan Aruch, which I'm going to give the English to because it gives us a little bit more ease for us to understand it. Says the Ramah. Now listen carefully to this, because what we're going to do with this is that we're going to have to try and unpack this a little bit, because this is really, Seudah Shlishit is quite easy. You have a couple of challahs, and you've done it, you've fulfilled your mitzvah. But look, it says the Ramah. There are those who say that it's prohibited to drink water from Mincha until Ma'ariv on Shabbos. Why? Because that is when the souls return to Gehenna. And therefore, you should not eat the third meal between Mincha and Ma'ariv. Instead, you should eat it before Mincha. Now, we know that that's not what the Rambam said. But Tosfos say that. And he says, though, there are those who say that it's preferable to actually pray Mincha first. That's what the Rambam said. And this is our preferred custom in all of these lands. And in any case, now listen carefully, one should not drink water from the rivers during this time, but you can drink in one's house. And all the more so other liquids are permissible. There's something about the water. And then there are others who say that it's only prohibited during the 12 months after one's mother or father has passed away. And there are those who say that this prohibition of drinking water is only on Friday evening. Okay? So what on earth is this whole thing talking about? Why is there a problem of water? Because that's when the souls return to Gehenna. That's what the Mishnah, that's what the Shulchan Aruch says. So what does he say? Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Az Chazarot, that's when the souls return. Now this means the Az Karov Lezman HaChazara LeGehenna. That is close to the time where the souls are going to return to Gehenna. Because the Midrash says, Kol Hashoyte Mayim B'Shabbos Ke'ilu Gozel Kroiv Avamesim. That anybody whoever drinks water on Shabbos, that's at that time where the sun is setting, but it's not yet dark. It's like stealing from your relatives. Sure. Very interesting. What does this even mean? And therefore, say we don't drink from that time. Now, what is important here, we can see that the Mishnah Berurah tells us that we need to be aware that that we need to that we shouldn't eat until we've davened mincha. And that's an important thing for us to understand. And our minhag is that we always daven mincha first before we say we eat Seudah Shlishit. And however, it says the situation where it's difficult to fulfill the mitzvah of Seudah Shlishit after mincha, you can do it before mincha. If it's before mincha katana, so there are two times: the mincha gedola, which is 12.5 hours into the day, and mincha katana, which is 10.5 hours into the day. So depending on how you are, but it's clear that our minhag is, and this is something that's very important for us to remember, our minhag is to really daven, is to really eat is to daven mincha after we've eaten our main meal and before we eat our Seudah Shlishit. Okay, but what is this whole business about drinking water? I don't know if anybody's heard of this before, and it's quite a crazy thing. So what I'd like to do, so I'd like to look at some of the commentaries where we can begin to just try and understand this, because it just makes our understanding of these things and makes our engagement with these things a little bit more, meaningful. So it says the Kaf HaChaim. Kaf HaChaim is a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. He says the following: there are those who say that the drinking of the water only applies Erev Shabbos, not on Motzei Shabbos. So he says the Sfira Lehem. Why is that? Because there are those people who hold that the reason is because the B'shah sheyotzim migehenim miskarerin bein. So what's going on here? What this means, just to translate the words, at the time that they leave Gehenna, mitkarerin bein, it cools them down. What is going on? So there's a concept in Kabbalistic thought that as Shabbos comes in, the souls of those who are in Gehenna, in hell, whatever hell is, some people have described hell as that deep sense of embarrassment. That's that heat that you feel when you get embarrassed. So those neshamas are freed for Shabbos. They also get a day of rest. But what happens is when they come out of Gehenna, they use the waters of the world, so to speak, of the rivers, to what? To cool themselves down. Venire, so some hold that it's Erev Shabbos, that they could use it to cool them down. Some hold that they cool themselves down on to just before Motzei Shabbos. And so therefore, out of the safek, out of the concern of the sakana, of the danger of using such waters, we don't drink the waters from the river at that time, which is quite an unbelievable concept. Now he says here, Katav Zal Moriz Zal Hirini Ma'od, that my teacher, he says, the Kaf HaChaim, really pushed me that I shouldn't drink any water before Havdalah. Amali, he said to me, a person who drinks water in the evening on Shabbos, meaning before actual Motzei Shabbos, yamut ba'askara. Such a person will die chas v'chalila from some type of plague. But if he's eating at Shalashudus, right, and then he continues his meal. So it's time for him to say Havdalah. Then he can drink water before Havdalah. In other words, if he carries on his meal into kind of what we call Tosefet Shabbos, an additional part of Shabbos, so then he can drink this water before he make Havdalah. And there's nothing in it. And he quotes another one of the great sages, Mikan Yireh. He quotes in the Gemara, he says that's why the Gemara says that people who drink the water at that time will die from this eskra. Those say that it's not on Motzei Shabbos, it's actually on Erev Shabbos. And he goes the whole discussion of this thing, that there's this danger of this thing called eskra. So therefore he says that there is a minhag not to drink the water. So we've got a whole number of things that we've brought up around Seudah Shlishit, Shalashudus, that I now want to just unpack a little bit more. And I'm going to unpack them from an unbelievable sefer. Just going to reshare my screen. There's a book that is so not used any longer. And it's called the Otzarat Tfilot. The Otzarat Tfilot is it's all the davening that we have, and then it's a collection of commentaries on that davening, and it's absolutely magnificent in so many ways. But sometimes what they bring is very different perushim, very different commentaries, which allow us to begin to understand things on this different space and different level. So let's use that, if you don't mind, just to try and understand a little bit more about the importance of Seudah Shlishit. So I've opened it up pretty big here, and he says the following. Katava Levush. Levush was one of the great halachic masters. He says the following. Yehi zahir ma'od lekayem Seudah Shlishit. Like the Shulchan Aruch says, that a person must be very strict and very careful to fulfill the mitzvah of Seudah Shlishit. Vehi minat Torah gam kain. And don't think that Seudah Shlishit is just a nice idea. It's actually a mitzvah from the Torah. Shekain darshu midichsiv tlasas min zimna hayom. He learns that from Psukim, because in the Psukim it speaks about hayom, and he goes through all of that. I'm not going to go into that here. Then he says, whoever fulfills the mitzvah of Seudah Shlishit, his schar is great. And in fact, Chazal said, he says the person, who fulfills all the Sudot of Shabbos is saved from three Puraniot, from three different types of tragedy or tragic events. What are those three things? Michevlo shel Mashiach, from the pangs of Mashiach, from Medina shel Gehenim, from Gehenim, and Milchemes Gog uMagog, and from the difficulties of this final war that's going to happen between Gog and Magog before Mashiach comes. The Bach says, how does that work? Seudah Leil Shabbat is Shabbos Bereshis. Okay, Seudah of Leil Shabbat reminds us of Shabbos Bereshit. Matzil Mechev L'Shel Mashiach. Such a person is saved from the pangs of Mashiach. Seudah Shachrit is Keneged Shachrit Shel Matan Torah. That it comes to the Shabbos is coming to correspond to the Shabbos of Matan Torah, and in that, therefore, what you nitzul meGehenim, you saved from Gehenim. The Ein Sholet Belom De Torah, because Gehenim cannot, listen carefully to this, cannot have any connection into those who are learning Torah, Lom De Torah. So what we see here is that actually, if we look in the davening of Shabbos, and that's why this was like a shir that spans not only Seudah Shlishit but the whole of Shabbos. The davening of Shabbos on a Friday night, right? What do we speak about? We speak about Ataki Dashtas. You, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you created the world by That's Shabbos Bereshis. The focus of Friday night is Shabbos Bereshis, is the creation of the world. This focus of Shabbos day is Yismach Moshe b'matnat chelko. That Moshe was so happy, was so rejoicing with this gift that he was given. That's the Torah. So therefore it's Matan Torah. And Seudah Gimel, what about Seudah Gimel? Shehi neged Shabbat le'atid. That is for Shabbos in the future. Nitzumi Gog uMagog. That there you'll be saved from the war of Gog uMagog. How do we know that? Avraham Yagel, Yitzchak Yiranein, Yaakov Vanav Yanuchuvo. It's all in the future tense. It's all about the future. So therefore we see that if a person eats these three meals, that connects into all these different energies of Shabbos. Avduraham was an incredible, also a commentary on the Siddur, and Avduraham, he now says the following. He says, Katav. Sorry, I just want to get rid of the of all those drawings. Okay, the Avduraham says, listen carefully to this. If you remember, we said that part of the important aspect of Shabbos is going into the meal with Einav Barosha, with eyes in your head, so that you can pace yourself, we would say today, in order to make sure that you don't eat too much, so that you can have Seudah Shlishit. Comes along the Avduraham. Listen to this. It's quite geschmack. He says, Mibnei Achila Gasa, a person who eats Achila Gasa, who eats too much, who eats like a glutton, person who eats a gluttonous meal has to distance himself from the meal that comes after that gluttonous meal. When a person sees, listen to this, it's an amazing way we're supposed to think about our lives. When a person sees that there's a mitzvah, that there's a connection, remember mitzvah means connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that there's a mitzvah le'echol gimel sudas, that you can eat 3 meals. Lo yochel b'shum suda, ki im kashir sheyuchal le'echol b'yigia zman ha'suda she'achareha. You won't eat that much at each meal, more than will allow you to ensure that you'll be able to eat at the time when the next meal arrives. And therefore, nimtza, we find, kol su'udoi sav l'shem mitzvah. That all the su'udos, all the meals of Shabbos are totally the shem mitzvah, for the purpose of the mitzvah, v'lizboa nafsho. And they're there to lisboa nafsho, they're there to satisfy not your body, but your nefesh. They're there to satisfy your spirituality. And since you're not eating so much, you won't sleep so much. Because you won't sleep so much, you can focus yourself on the learning of Torah on the day. And not only that, person will find that he's able to kovesh yitzro, he's able to conquer his yetzer in the matter of eating. Even when you really want Shabbos food, there's nothing in the world like a good cholot. You want more, but you'll know that if you eat too much, you can't eat Shabbos Shudas, therefore you'll hold back. And that's on Shabbos. You kovesh yetzer, you're able to overcome your yetzer. On Shabbos Kodesh, something special. And if you can do this on Yom HaMenucha, on the day of rest, on the day when you finish your lunch, you can go have a good Shabbos sloth. He says it's a learning for the week. Kol shekain, how much more so? Sheyaseh b'yom ha'melocha, you'll do it on the days we have to work. Shelo yechabeid alav, that you're not going to eat too much. It's an unbelievable idea. Sorry, I misplaced it. Levatlo mimelachto. You're not going to eat too much because you don't want to be mavachel your malacha. You don't want to be mavachel your work. You don't want to stop being working because you're so tired. And so, therefore, according to the way that Avudraham presents it, that the way we're supposed to eat is pacing ourselves, and the pacing of ourselves on Shabbos teaches us that during the week we also have to pace ourselves, because if we're going to try and avoid having that shlof so that we can learn Torah, how much more so should we learn that that during the week we also have to work. We've got to make sure that we're not mavatal, we don't in any way stop our work, so that we can continue to produce in the way that we need to produce. Okay, so that's fantastic. However, he quotes from, I'm not sure what book this is. I'm not sure the Mem Tet Mem, but he writes, Katav Asara Ta'amim Api Kabbalah. He says there are 10 reasons to have 3 meals. Why 3? Why 3 meals? So he says the first one is the Rimaz al Shabbat Hagadol, Shabbat Bereshit, Shabbat Matan Torah. The 3 special Shabbos. So every Shabbos we hint to Shabbos Hagadol, which is the Shabbos before they came to Mitzrayim, Shabbos Bereshit, the creation of the world, and Shabbos Matan Torah, the Shabbos on which Torah was given. We know that the Torah was given on Shabbos. Fine. That's number 1. We're looking at 10. Fundamental. Hope everybody's still with me. Number 2. Neged Avram Yitzchak and Yaakov. Whenever we know that there's 3, it's Avram Yitzchak and Yaakov, which is Yamin, the small guf. Okay, that is the right and the left of our bodies. So we got right and left, and then we got the guf in the middle. Gimel, Keneged Gimel Otiyot Shel Chesed. Unbelievable. You know why Shabbos has got 3 meals? Because there are 3 letters in the word Chesed, and Chesed becomes a primary point of Shabbos Kodesh. You know, we invite people over because we invite people over. We have Nachnas Orchim, but we don't realize that that's part of the makeup of what Shabbos is. 3 meals, Chesed, to Chesed at all those meals. And you know, we often think, just by the way, what is the Chesed of a Shabbos meal? We invite our friends, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. I'm not saying not, but not necessarily. Because it could be that the real chesed is to invite not our friends. It's to invite the people who really need, people who need companionship, but not only need food. Okay. The next one is Neged, Eden, Nahar, and Gan. What? Neged, the whole concept of Gan Eden, this whole concept of this primary garden that was where the world was created, that's part of Shabbos, the 3 meals of Shabbos. The next one, Neged, Kuf, Kuf, Kuf. What's Kuf, Kuf, Kuf? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Now, Baruch Hashem, my son Amichai, on his bar mitzvah, he learned the Haftorah, which the word Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh come from. If you don't say Kadosh, 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 when you're saying Kedusha, you say Kadosh, Kadosh. So what do? You mess up the Kedusha. You do less than the Kedusha. And he says if a person has less than the 3 meals, Mechaser Kedusha Achat. You create a lack of a certain level of Kedusha. Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. What is amazing, by the way, on that concept, It's Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvakot. The third Kadosh, which is the Kadosh of Seudah Shlishit, of Seudah Shlishit, is the Kadosh that is connected to Hashem Tzvakot, to Hashem's name himself. Okay, next. Then there's Neged Beit Rishon, Seudah Shlishit. It comes to correspond to the three different Batei Mikdash. And you can see, therefore, why Seudah Shlishit is the Shlishi, which is the future, the Atid. Then it's Neged, Hashem, Yud, He, Vav, He. Haba b'Shabbos lismoch im Yisrael. Amazing idea. This reminds me of an amazing idea. That it's coming to correspond to the Hashem's different manifestations of his name, Yud He Vav He. There's one of those manifestations that is the one that comes to be Mesameach, that comes to join the Simcha, and that is the manifestation of not the full name Yud He Vav He, but Yud, He, and Vav. That is three letters. That's says Lishmoach in Israel v'lakach yesh bo musaf. The reason why you have a korban musaf is you have additional korban because that's there to accommodate the simcha of having Yehu. This name with you. The next one, the eighth one. Quite amazing. This Neged Keter, Chochma, Ubina. It comes to correspond to the three highest levels of the Sfirot. The ninth one, Neged Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet. That one comes off of the bottom for the first three of the Sfirot. And the Yain, the 10th one is Neged Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. The Nefesh, the Ruach, Neshama, the different aspects of the spirituality of the person, and therefore he says, so a person who leaves one of them is like you killed something. You killed something in part of you. And so therefore, it's clear from these 10 things, the importance of not only having a Friday night dinner, not only having a Shabbos lunch, but also to ensure that we have something that celebrates Seudah Shlishit as well. And then I want to just point this thing out. And I'm going to annotate it because it's an important annotation. It says the following: V'gam al hanashim, also on the women, hachiyuv shel shalosh seudot, kamo al ha'anashim, that women and men have an equal obligation of Seudah Shlishit. V'yesh lahavinan godel schara v'chomer onsha retzoloymar kedei. He says that those of us who engage in Seudah Shlishit need to go and teach specifically the women who don't understand. And in those days, talking the importance of Seudah Shlishit, that we got to educate them to make sure that they get the schus in this mitzvah. And then he says, "V'od katar shegam b'seudah zu hagimel ra'ui la'adam lizaher me'achila maruba v'gasa." Says, even in this third meal, which is your third meal of Shabbos, and you think, oh, there's nothing, I don't have to worry anymore because I've done my 3 meals. He says, no, even in this meal, you've now learned Shabbos has given you this capacity to fight the Yetzirah, to eat more and more and more. You've got to leave a little bit of space. Why? Makom panui leSeudah damot, which is the Seudah Dalet, shehi Seudas melava malka, in order to ensure, right, that you can have got space to for the Malava Malka that's going to come a little bit later. Malava Malka is a completely different halacha, which we'll have some time. Please God, go look at that. But now listen to this. Gam shel. Furthermore, the reason why you shouldn't eat too much at Shudas, Gam shelo yu everav kvedim alav, that you're not all feeling so heavy. V'lo yuchal l'chabein da'ato b'tfilas arvis. We're about to move from Shabbos Kodesh into the weekday. How do we move through that? Through the tefillah of Ma'ariv. Says Avudraham, as you're approaching into the Ma'ariv of Motzei Shabbos, how do you want to daven that first vochadik, that first weekly davening that you're going to have? It's going to set the tone for the entire week. You want to daven it properly, not fast. Not all the things that we do to quickly daven, but rather you don't want to have heavy bones and heavy limbs and feel a bit heavy. Because then you can't really think and concentrate on your Ma'ariv that you're going to daven immediately after Shabbat. And so therefore we see, I think, it's quite an amazing thing regarding this concept of Seudah Shlishit that it connects to so many different aspects, Kabbalistic aspects and other aspects. But most importantly for me, what I learned in going through this source was that Shabbos is not just, and that's why we have to finish it off with Seudah Shlishit. Shabbos is not just this moment of davening, eating, finished, and have a shlof. Shabbos is a moment of deep, deep consciousness. A consciousness that demands of us to revisit how we do things. And the one that is there every day that constantly needs revisiting is the way we eat. And says Avudraham that when it comes to Shabbos, there's an opportunity for us to change our eating habits, to not eat with such excess, to eat less, because we need to remember that we've got other roles in our lives, not just the meal. We've got roles as parents, we've got roles as teachers, we've got roles as parents who are teachers, we've got roles as employers and employees. We have all these different roles, and we are not careful. There's that if you ever do a conference or a presentation, the one thing you don't want to do is the graveyard shift. The graveyard shift is after lunch. Everybody is so eaten and they're feeling tired. I mean, I remember in yeshiva, the best shlof you could possibly have was on the stender during that period of time. But why is that so important? Because what the Avudraham is saying to us is that out of Shabbos, we must learn to be prepared even in the way that we eat, so that when we come through that process of eating, we're still able to give our best to be most productive that we can be in the world. So those are some ideas around Seudah Shlishit. And we learned the halacha. The halacha, as I said, it's quite simple. You got to have Seudah Shlishit. When do we have it? Aminah is that we have it after mincha. You sit down. Ideally, a person should have two roles, and I don't want to go into too much of the technical. Ideally, one should have lechem mishnah, as one did with all the others. According to the Rambam, one should have wine as well. But we don't paskin like that. But one should have lechem mishnah. Ideally, you should make hamotzi. There is a whole discussion that if you can't make hamotzi and you're feeling too full, you can learn Torah, you can eat a little bit of fruit. Ideally, one should try, as we've seen, pace oneself so one can fulfill the mitzvah to its utmost. I hope you enjoy the different take, the different learning. Bezrat Hashem will continue next week. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening and a wonderful week and a beautiful Shabbos this week.